The morning sun spilled across the tiled floor of my kitchen as I sipped from my chipped mug, steam rising in gentle curls. It was a peaceful Tuesday until I noticed movement outside my back window. 5 people strolled across my freshly mowed lawn like they owned the place. Not cautiously. Not like visitors. They were confident, purposeful. One carried a fold-up chair, another a cooler, and all of them held tennis rackets. I blinked. No one had asked permission. No one had even knocked. I shoved my coffee aside and headed for the back door, slipping into my slippers as I went. "Excuse me," I called, raising my voice as I approached the group. "This is private property." The group stopped mid-stride and one of them turned. A well-dressed woman with perfect blow-dried hair and a smirk of entitlement lifted her sunglasses. "You must be the new homeowner," she said. "I'm Eleanor Fitzgerald, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. Her smile was sharp and rehearsed. "We play tennis here every Tuesday morning. It's in the community guidelines." My heart skipped. "This is my backyard," she nodded calmly. "Right, of course. But the court is part of the shared amenities. It's all covered." In Addendum C, Addendum what? There was nothing about that in my closing documents. Eleanor waved dismissively. "The previous owner agreed to it years ago. It's all official. If you'd like to contest it, the board meets on the first Thursday of every month. 7 sharp." With that, she turned and strutted toward the court like a queen returning to her palace. The others followed, laughing and chatting. The sound of tennis balls hitting my $35,000 professionally resurfaced court hit me like a drumline. My hands shook. That night, I stayed up digging through every inch of paperwork from my home purchase. Was no Addendum C. No easement, no HOA override, no community access clause. When I called my realtor the next morning, she sounded shocked. "Absolutely not. If there had been anything about a shared amenity or easement, I'd have told you. That court is yours. Completely private." But Tuesday was just the beginning. Wednesday, I arrived home to see a children's tennis class underway. 8 kids in neon sports gear were bouncing around the court while a man, Eleanor's husband, I would later learn, blew a whistle and shouted instructions. Thursday morning brought even more. I returned from grocery shopping to see folding chairs lined up by the fence. A cooler of drinks sat on my patio, and a tournament was in full swing. I walked up to a woman watching the game. "Do you know anything about this? Was this court actually community property before I bought the place?" She glanced at me, then nervously over her shoulder toward Eleanor. "We've only lived here 8 months," she whispered. "But when we moved in, we were told all the amenities were shared." Eleanor was very specific about the tennis court. She smiled apologetically and walked away. I stood there, watching a stranger drink lemonade from my patio table. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a hostile takeover. I showed up at the HOA board meeting that Thursday night with a folder full of documents. The meeting was held in Eleanor's lavish living room, leather chairs, glass coffee tables, and a wall of tennis trophies glinting under recessed lights. 12 homeowners sat in folding chairs, murmuring quietly. Eleanor stood near the fireplace, like a politician preparing for a press conference. "Our next item concerns over community tennis access," she announced smoothly. "Our new neighbor has a few questions." I raised my hand and stood. "It's not a concern, it's a property rights issue." The room quieted. My purchase documents, deed and plat maps clearly show that the tennis court is part of my private lot. No shared access, no easement, and definitely no Addendum C. Eleanor's smile thinned. Addendum C was agreed to with the previous owner. It may not have been recorded properly. I held up my documents. It wasn't recorded at all. My realtor confirmed it. It's not in the county record. And by the way, the previous owner said they never signed anything like that. That part wasn't true. I hadn't spoken to them yet, but her sudden flash of panic told me all I needed to know. The HOA treasurer, a nervous-looking man in his 60s, flipped through a binder and mumbled something about administrative oversights. I turned to the group. This is my home, my property. There is no legal basis for using my tennis court. Any future trespassing will be treated as such. Eleanor clenched her jaw. We've always had access. And yet, legally, you never did. The room stayed silent. For a few days, things were quiet. The court remained empty. Then came the certified letter. Violation. Notice to 3 counts. 1. Tennis court line color not matching community standards. 2. Recreational equipment exceeding height regulations. 3. Fence deviation from approved HOA design. Each violation, $100 per day. When I returned home that afternoon, I found Eleanor in my yard holding a tape measure against the fence. Just confirming measurements, she said sweetly. This has to stop. She smiled. Actually, it's just beginning, I laughed. Interesting, since board meetings are required to be announced with 72-hour notice, and I didn't receive one. She blinked, just for a second. Administrative oversight. Will. Resend. I knew exactly what was happening. Eleanor wasn't protecting the community, she was punishing me for standing up to her. So I installed cameras. High definition, motion detecting security across the backyard. Monday morning. The doorbell rang. A man in a reflective vest and clipboard stood on my porch. We received a complaint about unauthorized modifications to a tennis court, non-permitted construction, height violations, things like that. Fantastic timing, I said, stepping aside. Come take a look. He walked around the yard, checking measurements, scanning the lines. Nothing was wrong. Of course, there wasn't. What Eleanor didn't know. I worked for the county planning department. As a compliance auditor. I called my colleague Miguel, who had done the site inspection. You won't believe what else I found, he said. There are discrepancies on the HOA filings. Eleanor's property had its assessment adjusted 3 years in a row. Everyone else's value went up. Hers went down. Tax avoidance. I pulled the HOA bylaws from the county office. They clearly limited the president's term to 4 years. Eleanor had been in charge for 6. The board? Appointed, not elected. All previous elected members had resigned within months of one another. Convenient. As I highlighted passages in my home office that evening, my doorbell rang again. This time, it was the nervous HOA treasurer, Frank. Saw what's going on, he said quietly. It's not the first time she's done this. The court, I mean. I invited him and Frank explained everything, how Eleanor had slowly claimed workshops, gardens, even solar panels under vague community spirit pretenses. When questioned, she'd drown homeowners in violations or fines until they gave up. I resigned when the books stopped making sense, he said. Fees tripled. Income stayed flat. When I asked too many questions, my wife started getting fined. For everything. A garden hose. A wind chime. I showed him my documents. The maps. The blank space where Addendum C was supposed to be. Frank leaned closer. You want the truth? Go to Safe Lock Storage. Unit 23. That's where they hide the real records. The next morning, clouds loomed low over Willowbrook Estates as I drove to Safe Lock Storage, pretending to inquire about a unit. The manager, a young man with a clipboard and a Bluetooth headset, walked me through the facility. I wasn't here to rent. I was looking for Unit 23, the one Frank Thompson had whispered about. While we walked past rows of units, I noticed movement near the far corner. A balding man, a treasurer from the last meeting, wrestled a heavy banker's box. into the back of his sedan. His eyes flicked left and right, then settled on me just long enough to stiffen with recognition. He slammed the trunk shut and peeled out of the lot. I memorized his license plate and turned my attention back to the manager. Actually, I'll need to think about it, I told him. That evening, I parked a block away from Eleanor's house, watching from the shadows. The treasurer's sedan was already in the driveway. Through her window, I spotted them. Eleanor, the treasurer, and 2 other board members sitting at her dining table, papers spread everywhere. From across the street, I could see them gesturing, pointing toward my house. Whatever they were hiding, they were desperate to keep it buried. It was time to change the game. Back at the county administration building, I used my employee credentials to request aerial property surveys and historical photos of Willowbrook Estates. I needed proof, something to definitively show that my tennis court had always been part of my lot, and that Eleanor's claims were baseless. When the results came in, they confirmed my suspicion. The tennis court was built 4 years ago, 2 years after Eleanor had become HOA president. There had never been any prior community use. The only thing communal about it was Eleanor's imagination. Then submitted an internal request for Eleanor's property tax history. It was damning. For 3 years straight, her property value had been artificially reduced, resulting in thousands in unpaid taxes. The justification? Shared amenity burden. She had classified my tennis court as part of her shared responsibility, thus lowering her home's assessed value. This wasn't just corruption. It was fraud. It was a Friday when I returned from the grocery store to see 2 work trucks parked outside my house. 3 men in vests stood at the edge of my property with crowbars, prying up part of my side fence. I didn't even get out of my car. I called the sheriff's office from the driveway. When I stepped out, I confronted them. "What exactly are you doing?" One of them gestured toward a clipboard. "We've been ordered by the HOA to remove the non-compliant fencing that violates shared access agreements." "There is no shared access," I said, marching toward them. "You're trespassing." They paused, unsure. Just then, Officer Ramirez pulled up, lights flashing but siren off. I handed him my property deed, boundary survey, and HOA bylaws. "This is a civil matter," he began cautiously. "It becomes criminal the moment they damage my property." I interrupted, gesturing to the mangled section of fence. "And I'd like to file charges." The workers, realizing they were in dangerous legal waters, packed up and drove off. 5 minutes later, Eleanor's SUV screeched into my driveway. "You've made a huge mistake," she hissed, stepping out. In designer sunglasses. "The board has unanimously voted to place a lien on your property for unpaid violations." Ramirez stepped between us. "Ma'am, we're currently investigating trespassing and property destruction. You'd be wise to leave. This is HOA business." Eleanor barked. "The police have no jurisdiction in covenant enforcement." Ramirez didn't blink. "Destruction of private property falls squarely under my jurisdiction." "You're on very thin ice." Eleanor turned pale. She drove off in silence. That night, a message buzzed my phone from an unknown number. "Greater than Community Center. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Others want to help. Come alone." FTHE Next evening, I arrived at the dimly lit community center. A half-dozen people waited in a corner, quiet, nervous, heads down like we were part of a secret club. Frank Thompson stood with them. The woman next to him stepped forward. "I'm Diane, former landscaping committee chair." "I remember your name from the directory." She nodded. "Eleanor pushed me out when I questioned expenses. $20,000 for seasonal plantings. I never saw a single flower." One by one, the others introduced themselves. Former volunteers. Longtime residents. Victims of Eleanor's retaliation. One had a koi pond she was forced to destroy. Another lost her garden shed over a zoning revision. A man had paid nearly $9,000 in fines for a fence Eleanor later approved for another homeowner. This has been happening for years, Diane said. She targets specific properties, then builds fake rules to claim features as shared, and if you resist, she buries you in violations. Frank held up a thumb drive. Financial records. 5 years' worth. I made copies before I left. He passed it to me. The landscaping company Eleanor uses? Her sister owns it. Over $200,000 in payments across 4 years. $35,000 a year to maintain your tennis court, which until recently was supposedly not community property. I opened my laptop. Time to bring her entire empire down. We made a plan. I would handle the legal side, compile evidence, submit formal complaints to the county and state agencies. Diane would initiate a petition for a special HOA election. Others would document cases of selective enforcement and financial discrepancies. One man, Alan, volunteered to film anonymous testimonials from residents who had been retaliated against. People are scared, he said. They think Eleanor is the HOA. She's not, I said. She's a bully in heels. I spent the next week knee-deep in spreadsheets, financial reports, and digital maps. Everything pointed to a criminal enterprise disguised as neighborhood leadership. We filed a formal motion with the county clerk's office, requesting an emergency audit of Willowbrook Estates HOA. The very next morning, Eleanor came knocking. I didn't open the door. She left a note taped to my glass. Greater than you'll regret this. You think you know what you're doing, but you don't understand how this community works. I stared at it, then carefully peeled it off and tucked it into my evidence folder. She had no idea how much I understood. The next HOA newsletter included a seemingly casual announcement, greater than notice of concern. Certain residents are spreading false narratives and illegally requesting private board data. Your HOA is aware and will act accordingly. It didn't mention my name, but I could feel Eleanor's venom in every syllable. But her fear was showing. Meanwhile, Diane had worked overtime knocking on doors, handing out flyers, and organizing volunteers. By the following Thursday, she had 72% of resident signatures, more than enough to trigger a special election under HOA bylaws. We submitted the petition publicly at the next HOA meeting, held in the community center, not Eleanor's living room. Eleanor didn't even show up. Instead, her attorney sat silently in the corner, flipping through a leather-bound folder as the residents of Willowbrook Estates demanded answers. Frank stood to speak first. I was HOA treasurer for 3 years. I resigned after uncovering unexplained vendor payments, missing deposits, and manipulated budget reports. Every time I raised a concern, my family became targets. We got notices for wind chimes and stepping stones. Our mailbox height was investigated. This isn't community leadership. This is abuse. Applause broke out. Then Diane stepped up, holding a chart. The board approved $20,000 for fall landscaping. Here are photos from that season. Dead grass. No flowers. No new trees. The vendor was Eleanor's sister. Gasps filled the room, and then I stepped forward. I work for the county planning department, I said, calmly opening my folder. And I've compiled a full report on 5 years of property abuse, violations of HOA bylaws, and financial conflicts of interest that point to fraud. And if we don't act now, this will continue. The vote passed in under 2 minutes. A new election was officially scheduled for the following month. Eleanor didn't know it yet, but her reign was over. The next morning, I hand-delivered a formal complaint to the county auditor's office, along with Frank's financial files, property assessment discrepancies. and a summary of fraudulent vendor contracts. It triggered an automatic county-wide audit of the HOA's books. By the end of the week, Eleanor's phone was ringing off the hook. County inspectors visited her house. Not mine this time. Her husband tried to block them at the door. Bad move. 3 days later, Eleanor's sister's landscaping business was suspended pending investigation into contractor fraud and kickbacks. Meanwhile, residents started noticing strange changes. The violation notices that had haunted some homeowners for years stopped arriving. Retaliation fences were suddenly approved. Petty violations were under review. The spell Eleanor had cast over Willowbrook was breaking fast. And then, I received a call from State Attorney General's office. "Thank you for your submission," the investigator said. "This isn't just an HOA issue anymore. We're looking into potential charges of fraud, abuse of authority, and tax evasion. We'll be in touch." But Eleanor wasn't done yet. 2 weeks before the election, I received a notice taped to my mailbox. Official HOA notice and paid violation balance, $13,600. Lien has been placed on your property. Non-payment may result in foreclosure. It was laughable and illegal. I filed a counter-lien citing false claims and immediately submitted documentation to the county clerk, invalidating the original based on fraudulent fines and lack of procedural notice. Then I filed a civil lawsuit for defamation, harassment, and trespassing. My lawyer assured me she's desperate. This is a dying queen trying to burn the castle down. The same day, a second resident came forward with video footage of Eleanor admitting, during a private gathering, that the tennis court was never communal property, but that nobody would challenge her authority. That video went viral in our HOA's Facebook group. Support for her crumbled overnight. Even the last few board members began to resign. Election night was held in the community center's banquet hall. It felt more like a trial than a neighborhood meeting. Over 100 residents showed up. Of the 147 eligible voters, 132 voted for removal of the current board. Only 6 voted to keep Eleanor, and even those 6 looked ashamed as the results were read aloud. Eleanor wasn't present. Instead, she emailed a formal resignation letter at 6:57 p.m. 3 minutes before the vote. It read, "Due to the hostile environment created by certain divisive individuals, I hereby resign as HOA president, effective immediately. I am disappointed in this community's lack of loyalty." No apology. No admission of wrongdoing. But it didn't matter. She was gone. A newly elected board took her place that very night, led by Diane as interim president and Alan as treasurer. Transparency was declared priority number 1. And my first official motion? To amend the bylaws, limiting term lengths, mandating external financial audits, and explicitly listing protected private property features. Motion passed unanimously. The lien was removed from my property within the week. The county dropped all fines against me. In fact, they opened an inquiry into whether I was owed restitution for fraudulent enforcement practices. My fence was repaired, this time paid for by HOA reserves under the new board's authorization. But the real moment of peace came on a Sunday morning, 2 months after Eleanor's fall. I stood at my kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise cast golden light over my now empty tennis court. No uninvited strangers. No coolers or folding chairs. No echoes of rackets striking balls like hammers against my dignity. Just quiet and freedom. Later that day, Frank stopped by with a small gift, a framed copy of the plat map showing my court, fully within my property lines, labeled with a sticky note, greater than "Don't let anyone ever tell you what's yours." We laughed. "I heard Eleanor moved," he said. "Sold her house fast. Probably couldn't handle losing the power. She was never really in charge, I said. She just made everyone think she was. Epilogue 3 months later, the new HOA board launched a full transparency initiative, opened financial meetings, published spending reports, and a community suggestion box. The court remained mine, but I chose to donate one morning a month to a local youth tennis program. Run with my permission, on my terms. It felt like justice. And every now and then, when I sip my coffee and glance outside, I smile not because of the view, but because I know no one will ever try to take what's mine again, not while I still have the records, the credentials, and the fire to fight back.